Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Z Exchange. We are so excited to reignite the series with a truly special session and an extraordinary guest. Thank you for joining us today. Just a quick note throughout today's webinar, please feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A panel. Add them as they do come to mind. We'll set aside some time at the end of the session to address them. So don't be shy to put them in as you think of them, but we will answer them at the end. At the Z Exchange, we believe that for technology to be useful, it must be understood. It's this understanding of ZOS that's at the heart of our mission, creating a space where we can explore, learn, and deepen our perspective on the platform that continues to power so much of the world. And could there be a more fitting topic or speaker to help relaunch that conversation than today's session on the history and evolution of mainframe security? We're really fortunate to have Barry Schrager here with us today, someone who didn't just witness the evolution of mainframe security, but helped define it. As the architect of ACF2 and the founder of the Share Security Project, Barry's been shaping this space from the very beginning. Today, he'll walk us through how security practices have matured over time from basic protections to the foundational systems and concepts that remain critical today. He'll also share his perspectives on challenges that have never fully gone away. And most importantly, the conversation is not only about the past, but as we move forward, an era shaped by quantum computing and the growing use of AI, understanding where we've been becomes essential to navigating to where it goes next. So Barry, thank you so much for being here today. We're looking forward to hearing your reflections and gaining a deeper understanding on how mainframe security has evolved over time and where it may be headed next. So welcome, Barry. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Sammy. Welcome, everybody. As Sammy said, my name is Barry Schrager. I go way, way back on this, and we'll talk about it here in a second. Um, in at the University of Illinois, we're having issues with data security, and I did a lot of work in the area. And because of that, I was asked to form the Share Security Project in 1972. And we created the requirements for today's mainframe security systems. And you'll see as we go through it, those are the requirements that were met and actually follow through on the three security products. Also in 1973, I was one of 20 customers invited to Poughkeepsie to review their new MVM. It was called multiple virtual memories, but it had cited memories was too human-like. So they changed before they released it. They changed the name to multiple virtual storages, and we know it now as MVS or ZOS. Before it was announced, as Sammy said, I was the architect and primary author of ACF2, and I'm honored to be a member of the Mainframe Hall of Fame with people like Dr. Gene Amdahl, Grace Hopper, and my cohort in data security, Eldon Worley. In the early 70s, what security was it? The only security was ZOS or actually OS dataset passwords. There was a bit in the DSCB, the dataset control block, which indicated the dataset was password protected. Historically, that's the same one RACF uses for a discrete profile. From TSO, it prompted the user for the password. From batch, the operator had to enter the password. But how do you know the password? It was generally given to him on a piece of paper, or he had it in a notebook. And when it popped up, he looked it up and entered it. And of course, where were they kept for the system? Well, passwords kept in the data set called password in clear text. And I remember it was password protected. And passwords were rarely changed because of the process. It was really hard to just coordinate mechanically changing a password. And this is before system integrity. This was MVT. System integrity was introduced with MVS. At the University of Illinois in Chicago, we were having problems with data security. Data sets were getting deleted or, by accident or a purpose. And some, as I said in there, some students were doing it for fun. So because of that, I created a thing called resident account, which basically, if you think about ACF2, it was the logon validation or batch validation. It was system entry validation of batch and time sharing. So the user, basically, we were identifying a user by his ID and password. And AppClem, as it was working for me at the time, created intercepts for allocate, open, scratch, and rename to control the access. And what we did is it was pretty simple there. If the second level of the index started with a $sign, then it was only accessible by the user ID equals high level index. Pound sign is readable by anybody, but only the owner had write access, and anything else, no protection at all. So that gave us the ability to have faculty control and protect their own data, and also to faculty to be able to put something out for their uh, students in the class. You know, you can read this, but you can't accidentally write or delete it accidentally or on purpose. Meanwhile, chair was asked to form the security project in 72. And in 74, we gave a session on data security. Eldon Worley, who became the original author of RACF, which was introduced in 76, and myself and a gentleman from Boeing, and neither Eldon or I can remember the guy's name, but it was a well-received session. And it was an interesting because, a couple of years later, Eldon and I were talking. He told me that IBM spread people around the room looking see if there was an audience reaction to see whether there was a positive one or whether there's going to be any interest in data security from the user community. So to give you an idea that in the 70s, IBM, in some sense, people like Eldon were worried about security, but IBM as a whole was wondering whether their user community was interested at all in data security. Again, the world was different then. Only a couple of MIPS, if anything. I remember my manager at the University of Illinois was really thrilled when he got a one MIP machine. A gigabyte of storage is a lot. The 2314, which a disk drive of the day, had 29 megabytes per disk. Computer users were usually less than 50. Everybody knew everybody. Time sharing was just being deployed, and there was no a common method at all, or maybe no method at all of user identification or passwords and so on. I mean, CICS had its own, IMS had its own, TSO had its own, but for batch, generally, it had nothing. This is in the early days of mainframe security. It was the only thing protecting data was dataset passwords. If a user accessed it from their TSO terminal, it prompted them for the password, or from batch jobs, the operator had to enter it from the console. And what happened is usually the user gave the operator a piece of paper with the dataset name and password on it, or the operator had a notebook at the console that had the list of dataset names and passwords in it. And this is well before the security projects. I didn't know this at the time, but there was an IBM installation management facility product, um, that was done internally at IBM. In 1976, of course, IBM delivered the first version of RACF. This was Eldon's personal work product. He'd been working on it since the early 70s. And there was no generic profiles. It was protected one data set at a time. In 78, we delivered ACF2, and I'll talk about all these later. 81, Top Secret. And in 83, IBM finally came through with Protect All and Generic Profiles, because in the first version of RACF, it was one data set at a time, no Protect All, no generic profiles as they would call it now. The project stalled. We couldn't get past, the difference in system integrity and data security. I mean, it's clear if someone can bypass the standard interfaces of the operating system, then whatever you wanted to do with data security wasn't going to happen. So system integrity is the inability of a user to bypass the standard interfaces, and system integrity is a prerequisite for data security in a multi-user computer system. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what you do, any access controls can be bypassed. But we did agree on certain requirements. The security system should be part of the operating system. Identification and authorization of user is the first level. Security should not be able to be turned off by an authorized user. We want the security to be active all the time. That's even if you were going to have a user who could do anything, you still wanted to be able to journal what he was doing. Installation should be able to run a highly secure job along other jobs. So this is sort of like system integrity. We want to invoke high overfront functions like over zeroing out a data set, because when you deleted the data set, the data was still there, and this was to be able to overwrite the data set when you deleted it with junk or zeros to hide the data. And a designated interface program, we wanted the ability to say the only way a user can update this data is through my particular program, which did, when, say, hi, change data, but also said who did it and things like that. And we got a big relief when IBM announced its VS2 Release 2 operating system, the first version of MVS. It had a powerful integrity statement. It just to be clear, it didn't state there are no integrity exposures, but they knew of none, and if one was reported, they will fix it. And the quote from IBM: "If a user can access data in a manner not subject to management control, IBM will fix it." So, given that, that gave us the ability to not stop worrying about bypassing interfaces and things like that. We can now focus on the actual data security requirements. So in 74, the security project created the requirements, a common identification validation of users that says, I don't care which way you enter the system, IMS, TSO, batch, you have the same ID. And validation of user, centralized control facility. That's all the decision making was centralized in one place via centralized violation processing, the ability to say, Jack has done 14 violations today. I want to suspend his ID and somehow be able to do that automatically. Designated interface programs. I want to give permission for, this set of users to access my data, but they got to go through my program in order to do that. Protection by default. I created the phrase error of omission, which we'll talk about on the next slide. And also I did created the phrase algorithmic grouping of resources and users. Think ACF2 pattern masking and RACF generic profiles for data sets and UID string for users. This is the key: protection by default versus protection by itemization. I created the phrase the error of omission. With protection by default, if you forget to give someone access permission, they call you up and scream at you, you fix it, you buy them a beer the next day and you're friends again. But protection by itemization, if you protect something, it's public or modified and you can never take that back. Doesn't matter what you do. So it's clear from a security perspective, protection by default is the only way to go. The other suggestion is multi-factor authentication. Everybody at that point in time said passwords really weren't by themselves weren't sufficient. They wanted two-factor. The suggestions we heard: password and a badge reader. Two badge readers, one by the user and one by a guard. Because remember, at this point in time, everybody didn't have their own computer console or terminal. They generally were in rooms or groups, and there may have been a guard by. And one of the thoughts was, the user can sign on to Terminal 3 and the guard and wave to the guard, and the guard can then, flash his badge to the thing. Fingerprints, voice prints, and we even suggested lip prints, so you can kiss your computer in the morning and start work. In 76, IBM announced RACF. We were really thrilled about the announcement, but when we met at the summer share meeting, there was no protection by default. That it didn't. It was the error of omission I talked about a couple slides back. Protection by itemization, one data set at a time, controlled by the protective bit in the DSCB. No algorithmic grouping. Think RACF generic profiles or ACF2 pattern masking. Our IBM to the representative of the project, Bill Murray, this is not the comedian, but the IBM rep to the project, told me that according to RACF development group, these were not achievable. Interestingly enough, Bill Murray and I, this is, I don't know how many years later, are still in touch. About 2-3 years ago, we met together for a week or a weekend in New York and had a good time talking about old times. And he actually, you see me using, data like 3%, 5% here. He when I sent him a copy of this presentation, he updated a lot of those in terms of what the numbers were. And again, see, when IBM asked users how much data you were protecting, the answer was about 5%. This is like an input from Bill Murray on this presentation. Uh, and at the University of Illinois, we created the access facility, control facility prototype. It had pattern masking, what we called algorithmic grouping, but pattern masking in RACF or ACF2, protection by default. ACF2, we compiled rules from, the rule language into the internal language. I wrote the first rule compiler in PL1 and the rule interpreter assembly language. Eb Clemens had the intercepts already, so we used his intercepts as a base. Scott Kruger created the JES2 modifications, and I created a really basic TSO command interface. I gave a birds of a feather session at the March 77 share meeting. Several companies wanted it, and I did send it out. None got it implemented. Remember, this was just a university thing. We never really put it together for commercial use. Uh, we we then went to university to say there seems to be interest in this. We want to create a commercial product because we had done this in the past. It didn't take a lot of work. We created a product called JTIP, the JES2 TSO interface product, which provided, if you think about SDSF these days, it provided job submissions, sysout usage for JES2, and it was licensed by, I forgot, hundreds of places, including the IBM development labs. So we presented the concept of the security project to the university, but they declined to support it. Then out of the blue, Ron Murray of London Life Insurance called and offered to support the development. So I went to my manager, Dr. Tom Brown, and he said, go for it. So Eb and I went to London, Ontario in February of 78. And then we came back to Chicago like 3 weeks later. And then the three of us went back for 2 more weeks to create the final product for ACF2. A month before, in January 78, GM employee was head of the guide security project. So we interacted a lot. GM Audit was very unhappy with RACF. Delco division with 3% data protection after 18 months. GM Research about 4%. And an auditor told me on the side, he pulled me aside and said, we really don't know what percentage should be protected, but we know 3% ain't it. And the auditor said, when you get it working, let us know. I found out really their interest of actual goal is to get using us to poke IBM enough to prod IBM into fixing RACF. It was not really to purchase ACF2. So again, GM sought an alternative to RACF, and so they had us do a trial at Pontiac Motor Division. Jerry Lyons, who was his security officer, and this will to give you an idea of the environment in those days. Jerry Lyons knew every user and every data set, and when he first saw the first ACF2 report, he said, oh, that's Jack upstairs. He's accessing the radio inventory. We want to optimize the model year build-outs. You can't put an inexpensive radio in an expensive car or vice versa. So Jerry knew what the users were, what the purpose was, and what the business purpose was. ACF2 eventually was installed at 135 GM sites worldwide. And this is before the internet. So this gave us a local user, because remember, there were local user groups for mainframes at the time all over the place. And now we had a local customer in each of those shops, and 135 of them. Now GM, of course, it outsource its data processing to Pro Systems, and then brought it back in house, and now it's in 6 sites. You think about it, I have no idea how many in setups GM is all over the world, but 130, 150. There's no way the administrators in these 6 sites know who is and what all the data is and everything else. The other thing that happened at the time was Barry Lewis, who I knew from Share, invited me to present in DC after joining the Department of Labor. I said, labor is still MBT. There's no point in doing this because MBT doesn't have system integrity. And he said, trust me, just do the presentation. A few weeks later, he moved to the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. and they have placed him in labor, to give him something to do while his security clearance is being processed. And then he requested ACF2 at the CIA. Uh, um, 1 month after installing it, he shared a mix, some good news and bad news. He said they discovered a flaw that belonged to IBM, but a guy could have blocked it from ACF2. I said, "Okay, Barry, what is it, and how do I block it?" He says, "I don't want to give it to you because we may have to use it." This is now thinking of hacking from a really positive point of view, if you want to think about it. Uh, CIA purchased ACF2 and recommended it to 100 of their associates and subcontractors. When I asked, "Can I have the information on who to call to follow up?" He says, "I can't do that. You'll just get calls." The key to part of the key to the success of ACF2 was, I mean, if you think about it, you're a big company and you're going to buy a purchase product, a security product from IBM or from Schrager, Clemens, and Kruger, these three guys. What happened and helped us a lot was there was an ACF2 share user experience. Linda Vetter from General Motors and Barry Lewis of the CIA. We couldn't use those references for the product, but we gave out process copies of their presentations, which was obviously just as good or even better. ACF2 Success funded the first VM security product. Charlie Cow did that as product architect. And the first operating system audit product, Examinia MVS. It's now a CA examiner, CA auditor, Martin King was product architect. We sold to UCell at the end of '86. My partner Eb had left us and come back. My partner Scott Kruger kept saying the Mainframe's going away in '95. We won't have anybody to sell to, and so on. He kept pressuring me. So we ended up selling to UCell at the end of '86. At the time, we had 2,700 installations worldwide, including a lot of these known places like the CIA, NSA, MI5, and so on. You can see the list there. And a 60% market share against RACF and Top Secret. 5 offices around the world. UCell was then acquired by Computer Associates in '87, and CA was acquired by Broadcom in 2018. But the world is different today. Then there was a few dozen users, maybe 100 or two, now thousands. The security operations staff knew the users. Again, Jerry Lyons looking at the first data set logging and the user ID. That's Jack, that's radio inventory. Jerry knew all the users and all the corporate data and the business reason for the access. Whoops. But in today's world, organizations only have a few data centers. Again, GM went from like 135 data centers around the world to 6. Security officers and security administrators do not know and can never know all the users and data. And there's a formal approval process for data users, data owners, and user managers to request permissions and so on. But some employees have been around for decades. It's not unusual and these days to talk to somebody who's been working in a computer for 40 years. They changed roles, got promoted. Access permissions have evolved over time. A lot of times they were given permissions based on temporary projects. But if all the old permissions been reviewed, is there a risk someone can still carry their old permissions? I mean, just because you gave someone access, for a month 10 years ago, doesn't mean they still should have access. Uh, Non-public information, lacks security controls. This is the ACF2 UID asterisk, read asterisk, or the RACF ID asterisk, yeah, and UIC read. If these things are in place for anything other than like the cafeteria uh, menu, uh, shows a real lack of understanding of what data security is. Copies of production data, again, best of intentions, done for testing, not protection as well as production, not masked, sometimes for privacy. Derivative data, reports and database query results, backups, are those protected? A common attack vector is obtaining insider credentials, and then last controls and unprotected copies really make that a big whammy, a negative whammy. Access permissions must be reviewed. Where's all my sensitive data stored? Who knows? I was once part of a development team that John worsted, or I forgot what the company name was. We created a product called DataSniff, which looked at data sets and picked out data sets that had sensitive data in it. And then who has permission to view or update the sensitive data from a user manager point of view? What data does my employee have access to view or modify? And sometimes as they change roles, it's employees, it's not unusual for them to accumulate access permissions over time. When when we sold SKK at a 5-year non-compete, when I came back at EKC in the late 90s, I developed the following reports, ACF2 reports, and they're now EKC is those reports are now owned by Vanguard. There's the data owners, data set reports, who has access to my data, the data owner resource reports, who can access my sensitive transactions, user owner data set reports, what data can my employees access, and user owner resource reports, what transactions can my employees execute. And ACF2 now provided, this is Broadcom reports, ACF, RPT-RX, and XR now provide similar analysis. Z-Secure provides reports, similar reports for RACF. But again, as I said before, users accumulate additional access over time, but the accumulated access, if not regularly reviewed, presents an exposure because again, if someone had permission 5 years ago for a product, doesn't mean they still should have permission now. And again, permissions should be periodically and actually must be periodically reviewed from both the data owner point of view and the user manager point of view. Whether that's done, I've seen places where they do it once a year, but a lot of times I've seen places where they really want you to do it, the managers to do it once every 3 months. Vulnerability is the code delivered by IBM and the independent software vendor secure. Does each vendor who does business for you make a statement of integrity? Uh, are there any installation added SPCs and exits that have integrity vulnerabilities in them? What about installation added FCCs which alter the state of a caller? One of the When I did an audit of a place and I forgot where it was, but I found an SVC that gave you supervisor state, and the system program manager called it secure because it was password protected and it required the letters AUTH and register 0. Yeah, for nice protection. Again, can sensitive information be exfiltrated by downloading dataset to PC or emailing it directly from the mainframe? That's where we are, and now we can do questions. I can't hear
Thank
you,
you so
Sammy.
much, Barry. Um, so I wanted to go through and do the questions. I see for some reason our Q&A panel didn't pop up this time, but I do have a hand up, so I'm just going to go ahead and allow them to talk and ask the questions themselves. If you guys have questions, feel free to raise your hands. If you don't want to do that, I will be following up with you guys via email after the presentation. Feel free to send any questions into us directly as well. Barry's email address is up on the screen now. You're welcome to contact him with any questions you may have security related, or as I said, I will make sure to get out links to the presentation and you can reply to me and I can field the questions to Barry that way. So I'm going to go ahead and start. Steve, I'm going to allow you to talk here with whatever questions you may have.
Okay. Hi, Barry.
Hi.
We've never met, but I thought I'd give you something to possibly update your slides. I was with IBM for a long time, but in 1986, I started consulting with DIA, and I know you mentioned NSA and CIA, but DIA was an ACF2 shop as well. Very well might be today. I don't know for sure, but you can add that in probably as one of your reference points.
What was organization? CIA and NSA and who else?
DIA, Defense
Oh, DI.
Intelligence.
Okay,
Yeah,
DIA. Okay.
yeah, yeah. Um, the other thing, I just had a question for you. I consult for CDW now, and work in a lot of different environments. I've got one ACF2 client. The rest of them are all RACF. But have you found anything that's just kind of like an audit light product. Obviously there's Z-Secure and, you got a license and all that sort of stuff. And I'm not saying those products aren't good, but, sometimes it's nice just to have kind of a Swiss Army knife that can work in all environments that, maybe as part of CBT or anything like that, that can do some basic analysis of, RACF, ACF2, and just find vulnerabilities without having to license, various products. So I'm just curious if you got any thoughts on that.
No, I actually have not run into any of those products.
Okay.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you so much, Barry. I have one more here. David, you are on but muted. Oh, there you go. Go ahead.
Barry, David Hayes here. Hi, old buddy.
Hey, David, how are you?
Pretty good. Let me tell the group an interesting story. You and I ended up together. This is quite a few years ago, and I had wandered into an ACF2 installation that had decided that they could do production and development in the same LPAR. And they'd done some engineering with ACF2 and decided they could use SecVol in the global systems options and divide out their storage and just allow people access to one volume or another. Well, you and I both know that doesn't work. Yeah. In fact, I remember I called you and asked you about it, and you were appalled. And you said, when we put SecVol in, we never intended it to be used that way. That was just to control the system volumes. And so I made no progress at all with this organization. This is a rather important organization that you read about in the newspaper regularly. And so lo and behold, Barry was casting about looking for work. And I was able to actually get Barry, without letting the organization know, help me with that audit. And that organization never knew what hit them because they had the author of ACF2 evaluating their ACF2 system. And they were working on corrective actions for the next 4 or 5 years, I believe, Barry.
Yeah, I think so.
But it was fun teaming up with you. I also remember doing this presentation at Share for the 40th anniversary. So we're not young men anymore, are we?
No, we're not. That was a long time ago.
Yes, it was. Well, anyway, I appreciate the presentation and great to see you on the screen.
Thanks, David.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. It looks like that is all the questions and comments we have for today. Like I said, I will be emailing each of you. Feel free to reply to me with anything additional you'd like, any security questions for Barry, or as you can see, his contact information is up on our screen now. Thank you so much for your time today, Barry. We appreciate it. And thank you for everyone who joined us.
Thanks,
Have a
Sammy.
wonderful day.